It's time for a visit from a member of our expert network. He is one of only a handful of certified attorneys in New England specializing in the field of OUI. He also does other forms of law, including personal injury law. And he's joining us in the Lowell Spinner Studios, attorney Michael Bowser. Good morning to you, sir.
Good morning, Ted. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you surviving the pandemic?
I am surviving. It's been an interesting journey since March. Some ups and downs, some very strange twists and turns with the courts and police and enforcement and arrests and everything else.
I would guess you've basically been doing nothing. Are there DUI compliance checkpoints? Are there any court cases going on? I thought everything shut down.
So back in, I tried an OUI marijuana case to a jury in March, the week before St. Patrick's Day, and this was in the Concord, Mass District Court. And I had just gotten back from Florida. COVID had just started to hit as a national issue. And I just remember picking the jury, talking to all the jurors at sidebar with the DA and the judge, and we're all huddled up, and our heads were probably all within a 3-foot bubble. And I just kept thinking to myself, we can't do this. This is not going to work with what's coming. And sure enough, I finished that trial, and the next week they shut the world down. And then it went on this arc where from that point through, I would basically say July 4th, the only new cases that I came in were essentially cases where the police had to make an arrest. Like literally there was a crash, there was an accident. They had to make a decision and an arrest, but nobody was out and about. The restaurants were closed, bars were closed. I think the police were taking very much a hands-off approach. If they didn't have to you can imagine bringing someone back to a police station during the height of COVID. They'd have to decontaminate the booking facility, the lockup. So there wasn't a lot of arrests. I still had cases coming in, but very, very few. The courts were closed. And then right around the beginning of July, it's like somebody flipped the switch and the world came back on, and I've never been busier since.
Are you actually getting into court, or is everything still virtual?
So, I mean, I've got a different perspective than most attorneys because I practice now in Maine. I'm practicing in New Hampshire, as always, and Massachusetts. So everything came back gradually to the point now where in New Hampshire, they are doing in-person bench trials, but the arraignments and the pre-trial, what they call trial management conference statuses, are all telephonic. In Massachusetts, they're doing now limited events, including the arraignment in some motions and bench trials in person, but everything else is on Zoom. And in Maine, it's been a combination of both telephonic and Zoom. And ironically, I had a couple of jury trials scheduled for June, Mass residents with Maine OUIs, and of course, the juries were canceled, and they would have to have quarantined for 14 days before jury selection if they were to go forward. But everything is going forward now, and in fact, I was on a Zoom with the Lowell District Court, which is now open, finally, and they are scheduling jury trials for the end of October on a trial basis in limited locations, meaning they've identified about 17 courthouses where they're going to try to do jury of 6 as opposed to jury of 12.
Okay. What does it mean for the defendants in whatever the case is? I mean, we have had video portions. Sometimes you see people arraigned through video, etc. But in terms of the type of process they're getting, does this in any way jeopardize the full defenses that people will get?
Well, for instance, they just
said yes.
Well, it does. They just did the first pilot jury trial in Keene, New Hampshire, in the Superior Court. They had to spread the 12 jurors throughout the courtroom because they couldn't sit all together in the box, and they literally had the witnesses wear a clear face covering so that the jury could see the face of the witness as they testify, because the juror is asked.
Sure, that's important.
Most importantly, to judge the credibility.
Sure.
And if someone's up there with a mask, who knows what they could be doing behind that mask as they testify. So that's how they did it in that one particular pilot. The lawyers and the defendant were allowed to remove their mask in order for them to communicate at the defense table, and the jurors were actually instructed, do not take offense or read into the fact that the defense lawyer and his client may be able to remove their mask during the proceedings to communicate. But in Massachusetts, the Supreme Court has said that the pandemic and the delays caused by it are not going to impact a person's right to a speedy trial. And you've got people in custody awaiting trial, held without bail, for several months now.
Yeah, you're not having trials,
No.
so it's not a speedy trial
the
because
S-
it's no trial period,
And
right?
but the SJC has said that public safety and community safety overrides the right to a speedy trial, and they've basically said that those violations will not be accrued against the Commonwealth due to the pandemic.
Are we seeing DUI checkpoints? I haven't heard of one, but we normally get that thing. It says, hey, this weekend they're going to be conducting compliance checkpoints.
No, I didn't. And ironically, I mean, I can tell you a couple of stories. Earlier on in the pandemic, I had a gentleman from Massachusetts that was arrested in a very, very small town in New Hampshire. And when the local officer brought him back to his station, they don't have a breath test machine. He called the neighboring community and said, can I bring him over to blow into your machine? And they said, absolutely not. And then he called the second department and said, can I bring him over to your department? They said, absolutely not. And then they looked at my client and said, you want to go to the hospital for a blood draw? And he said, absolutely not. And then I had another case, shortly thereafter where the cruiser video depicts the officer after he arrests my client. He goes into his duty bag and he withdraws a brand new mask, and he places the mask on my client as he transports him to the station. So these little changes in the way that they do things, have affected some cases. But the enforcement is still out there. Absolutely, since July, the bars have been open to a limited basis. The police are back out there, I think, enforcing the laws as they always have.
Have you had any clients who have been fined for some type of protocol or mask violation? I know there aren't many. I spoke to a couple of Lowell police officers who told me we have not issued a single ticket as of a month ago for any mask, whatever. Are those... I had an attorney friend of mine tell me those aren't laws. Those are suggestions, and not a single one of them would hold up in court.
I haven't seen it. I haven't seen a single person, nor have I heard of a single person that's had a citation, a warning, or an arrest related to a failure to wear a mask. And they are advisories. I mean, just as you look at the boards and the highways in Maine, it's an order. And I have a home in Maine and an office in Maine, and thankfully my practice makes me an essential worker. So I was back and forth and essentially living in Maine all summer.
You should have become a teacher. You wouldn't have been essential.
Right. So, but the board on the highway was, it's an order of the governor, and it's a misdemeanor to come into Maine in violation of those 14-day quarantine or 3-day test orders. Whereas in New Hampshire and Mass, they were advisories and suggestions, not a violation would not commit a misdemeanor where it did in Maine.
Will the order in Maine hold up in court if somebody ever challenged it?
It has. It was.
So there have been court cases
it
about
was litigated back in June. A couple of campgrounds were asking actually it was the Maine federal court. They went to federal court and state court, and both of those orders in both of those courts were upheld.
How is your main practice, by the way? We've talked about the differences, especially in your specialty, operating under the influence. Different laws, Massachusetts and New Hampshire, different repercussions, different length of stay on your record. How does Maine compare? Is it closer to Mass or closer to New Hampshire?
Much closer to New Hampshire. They have a 10-year look back like New Hampshire does, not a lifetime. I've also found that in Maine, the prosecution, if given the appropriate facts and law, and you can raise an issue, they're willing to discuss and consider reducing an OUI to a non-OUI offense, which is incredibly important for a Mass driver with a prior history. Mass doesn't do that. In Mass, it's go to trial or plead out to the OUI. New Hampshire and Maine, they do give the prosecution discretion to charge bargain, meaning reduce some. I just had 2 of those in Maine where the OUIs, both with breath tests, which I was ready to challenge, both ended up getting reduced to driving to endanger, which is a much better disposition than drunk driving. I've been able to move probably 30 cases in New Hampshire since this all started, going through the same normal course of administrative hearing remotely, court process remotely, and then things have still resolved as they always have favorably for many of my clients. But in Mass, we're basically at a standstill because we can't get a trial and everything is on hold.
Only a couple of minutes remaining. The breathalyzer been marked by controversy for a couple of years. You broke the story right here on the morning show. Have they worked out the kinks? Do we now have a breathalyzer test that will stand up in court in Massachusetts or anywhere else?
So we do. However, there's another issue. The Office of Alcohol Testing sent out a memo back in June notifying all of the DA offices across the state and all the police departments, both state and municipal, that there was an issue with the software where 2 of the required fields that they're supposed to fill out, they're supposed to submit their report to the registry under the pains and penalties of perjury, and those fields have to be completed for a valid test, and apparently many cases were submitted without that information being included, so there is yet another software glitch that has to be addressed.
Always something. If folks need your services, as we always say, you're the one member of our expert network that I'm trying to put out of business. We don't want people drinking and driving. You've got designated drivers. Yep. You have Uber. For Christ's sakes, just walk if you have to. But we know people aren't going to listen, and they're going to eventually need your services if they make that mistake of drinking and driving. How do they get a hold of you?
The website is the easiest way to find me any time of day or night. 24/7 is www.bowserlaw.com.
Have you changed the way you've been interacting? Now you have face-to-face meetings, I imagine, are much more difficult for you.
We're doing in-person intakes, but we set it up so that I maintain my 6 feet of distance from a people, and when I sit down and go through the details of cases and I have to write out information for people, we all mask up and we sanitize the rooms before and after. So, we're doing our very best to keep both my staff but the public that's coming into contact with my office safe as well.
Do you put them behind plexiglass and tell them, if you don't take my advice, you better get used to this view?
No, no, that would be a good approach, though.
Scare tactics. Scare them straight.
Should I do a shout out to a couple people?
Of course you can.
My friend Helga in Lowell had a birthday. I just wanted to say happy birthday to her last Sunday, and I wanted to say hello to the Squaries, Christina and Carlo in Chelmsford, both good eggs. No pun intended.
A couple of shout outs there. Attorney Michael Bowser. One more time, that web address, sir.
BowserLaw.com.
All right, and now practicing in Mass, in New Hampshire, and in Maine. So if you drive up to Maine and get in trouble in vacation land, you've got somebody who can help you there. Thank you, sir. Always good to check in.
Thank you, Ted.